time it is, wherever in the world you're watching this, welcome to episode 140 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Now, WBBL, Sid, WBBL has come to an end.
It's all over.
Again, very sad. We watched the final yesterday, and it was a bit of a surprise result because the Adelaide Strikers beat the Sydney Sixers.
Yeah, the Sydney Sixers are top the ladder, and they topped it pretty comprehensively. They qualified directly for the final via the sort of this strange semi-final format that they have.
Yep.
They qualified directly to the final with 2 games to spare. Won those last 2 games anyway.
And then they choked in the final. They really didn't they?
Yeah, there was a couple of key incidents in the final, weren't there? You pointed to one on Twitter with first of all, when the Strikers were batting. Bearing in mind that the Strikers have very much been a bowling team this season. They were top of the bowling metrics. They were quite a long way down, sort of 4th or 5th in the batting metrics. There was a key incident when they were batting, wasn't there, Raf?
Yeah, it was fairly early on, and it was Dottin on strike. It was Perry bowling, I believe, and she ran in. And Dottin was caught.
Dottin really hadn't been middling it, had she? And it was another one where she didn't quite middle it.
And she was caught, and then
she started to walk off.
Yeah, and then it was ruled to be a no ball, and it showed that Perry had just overstepped.
It was a really close one.
It was a very fine call, and actually that was crucial because Dottin then went on and made a 50 at a reasonably rapid rate, whilst actually at the other end the strikers slightly struggled with the bat.
Yeah, she pulled on the runs in the last couple. 2 of the last 3 overs were kind of big overs, and they needed those runs because they only won by 10 in the end.
Yeah.
For me, the other really interesting and key moment was actually between the innings. So as anyone that watched it will know that the second innings was delayed because Susie Bates couldn't see. So Susie Bates was complaining that the sun was in her eyes.
Yep.
So they waited like nearly 15 minutes while the sun went down behind the roof of one of the stands to allow them to carry on. The umpires said this was for the players' safety, and yeah, absolutely, that feels reasonable, and it definitely feels like something they should have been aware of and should have done something about in advance. And the commentators said that at other grounds, for example, they literally put up black curtains in the air to stop this happening. Anyway, but I don't think that this did the Sixers any favours because, look at what happened afterwards. They had a disastrous first 3 overs, then panicked, started trying to hit it too hard, then lost 4 wickets, and from there was almost no way back. And what happened really, if you go back to that break, they spent 15 minutes, Susie Bates and Alyssa Healy out in the middle, with the Strikers players all needling them and sledging them about and going, "Oh, you're wimps, just get on with it." Susie Bates, The commentators had Amanda J. Wellington on the player mic,
up, wasn't she?
And they goaded Amanda J. Wellington into going to try and talk to Susie Bates. Susie Bates initially just turned away, and she was just like, "No, I'm not talking to you."
Yeah, I'm not.
No, didn't say that. She just literally said nothing and turned away. But eventually, she was like persuaded to say something, and she was forced to defend it. And I just think that it really didn't help the Sixers' mindset actually.
No.
And I can understand that Susie didn't want to bat when she couldn't see the ball. Clearly, that is dangerous, and we don't want that. But
it was that thing of actually being out in the middle.
Yeah.
If both teams hadn't been on the field of play and they'd just been on the edge and they'd been in their own huddles, in their own kind of camps,
could have been
then
very
that would
different.
have been
But
okay.
they left them isolated in the middle. They lost their concentration, and that showed in what happened. So.
The Strikers did nothing wrong because you can totally imagine the Sixers doing exactly the same if it was reversed.
Oh yeah, Alyssa Healy would have been the first.
Healy.
Would have been the first there to
because that is
get
partly
the needle out.
Cricket is
poke.
Cricket is partly played in the mind, isn't it? And
no one knows that better than Alyssa Healy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So there you go. So I think that it was actually quite funny to watch Wello doing that, and fair play to her. And it was just a bit of an odd, strange situation, and I think you're right that in the end the Strikers managed to psych the Sixers out, and as I say, they choked a bit. So.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Now, Raf, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
So we've seen the last 200 finals, and now this WBBL final. Charlotte Edwards has taken a team to the final, and they've not won the final. Has this kind of taken the gloss off Charlotte Edwards' achievement? Because there's no doubt there has been a fantastic achievement for her to come in and turn this Sixers side around. And there's been other things as well. Ash Gardner's had a really great season. Sophie Ecclestone's come in and done well. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But, you know, Charlotte Edwards has got to be... It's no longer a coincidence that Charlotte Edwards comes into all those teams and they do well. But does it take a little bit of the gloss off the fact that they didn't win the final again, exactly the same way the Braves haven't won the past 200 finals?
Yeah, and of course the other one is the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy final in September. Vipers were runners up to the Diamonds. I think it's an interesting one. I mean, I guess from Lottie's perspective, of course it will take some of the immediate shine off. It's disappointing. She'll be really unhappy with the way that they came out and batted, and she'll know that you know, 99 times out of 100 they should have chased that score down, and they would have absolutely been expecting to do that. It's just that, you know, they just had that one-off slip up and it happened on the wrong day, and so I think it will, for her at the moment, take some of the shine off, but it shouldn't in the long term take any of the shine off what she's achieved with that team. The team that won the Wooden Spoon last year, now finishing second overall, and I think that that's just brilliant, and it shows what an excellent coach she is. You know, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that everything that she touches turns to gold. And yes, in this case, it's kind of turned a bit to silver rather than actual gold, but it's a remarkable achievement. And I hope that it doesn't take the gloss off in the long term, because I think this is professional sport and you're going to have those moments and you're not going to be able to win everything. And it's not so long ago that actually, you know, we were even talking on this podcast a few months ago that about Southern Vipers, are they going to keep winning everything because they just won the Charlotte Edwards Cup? And we were kind of going, are they too dominant? And that was what all the conversation was. And they're not going to win everything. Every team that Lottie coaches is not going to win everything, because no team wins everything and no team will win every match that they play. And sometimes your bad game will come when it's the final.
Yeah.
So I don't think it should take the gloss off, no.
Okay.
We have had a question that actually came in following last week's episode from Andrew Brown to specifically ask us to reflect on how the English players got on in WBBL. So perhaps we could talk about that for a bit, and perhaps we could also start by playing Capsy Bingo. So Alice Capsy, an interesting season because she didn't have the consistency that she would have liked to have had, but she did have that one really brilliant innings. I think it was 80 or 50 something balls, and you know, really, I feel that she really announced herself to the Australian public, who perhaps may not have been massively aware of her beforehand. And, you know, there were some commentators kind of saying early on in WBBL, oh, who is this Capsy? Well, they know who she is now. And the worrying thing, if you're an Australian supporter, is that she's going to be playing in the Women's Ashes for the next 15 years. And she's only 18.
Yeah, I mean, she, you know,
and you know, she's only
the
going
very
to get
best
better.
Players peak in their mid to late 20s, don't they? I mean, you know, their very best runs of form tend to come, you know, sort of 25 to 28.
So that's
typically.
an intimidating prospect. So I think that overall she's had a successful WBBL, I would say. And the other one is Ecclestone, Sophie Ecclestone, who you mentioned just now, who's had a good showing for the Sixers. And actually she was in the top, near the top of your bowling rankings, wasn't she, Sid?
Yeah, she was in the top 10. She wasn't right at the top, but you know there'd been some question marks over, and the Australian commentators in particular have been banging on since the last Ashes about how Ecclestone, she can't perform in Australian conditions. She bowls too fast.
Apologies
she can't,
for the
she
accent.
can't get any grip and turn, and but that's never really what she's been about. So it's true that if you were just watching her like in the last Ashes, you'd go, oh well, she's bowling too fast, so she's not getting any turn. And of course she's a spinner. But the thing is that her game's not really about that. Her game's much more about, you know, variations in pace and angle and things. And that what she's shown is that she can do it on Australian conditions. And you know that going forwards, that's going to be a positive for England, and it's a little bit of an, you know, one in the eye for all those Australian commentators that thought that, you know, because she wasn't achieving any turn, that meant that she was, you know, not going to ever be any good in Australian conditions. So,
yeah. So yeah, those are a couple of names. I mean, I think overall it's not been a kind of classic tournament for the English players. They haven't dominated it. And
No, I mean, even Lauren Winfield-Hill winds up being, a bit further down in that she scored like 250 runs. Danny Wyatt, who played a few less games, of course, because she wasn't able to play right at the beginning because England wanted her to have some more rest time. So I think she only played 11 games in the group stages, scored 250 odd runs. Tammy Beaumont, less than 200 runs. She had one decent knock and didn't do great elsewhere. So, a little bit of a middling tournament for most of those English players, to be fair. But that happens sometimes. And actually, overall, honestly, for me, it wasn't actually a vintage tournament. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed watching it, but it wasn't a vintage tournament. The leading run scorer, Beth Mooney, scored 100 less runs in the group stages than she'd scored in the group stages in the previous 2 seasons. And she wasn't even the number 1 batter in one of those 2 seasons. So I think that goes to show that things were a little bit down. That doesn't mean it wasn't an exciting thing. It doesn't mean that we don't want more of it. It doesn't mean we're just not disappointed. And I certainly will tell you one thing I don't want, Raf. I'm going to disagree with some of our other podcast friends on other podcasts. I don't want them to shorten WBBL. I want them to keep it like it is. I want a proper full season with 14 matches where there's real time for some narratives to build. There's times for teams to slip and then come back. And I like the fact that that's the length of the tournament is what makes it the Premier Tournament. If you shorten it to half the number of games, it just won't be the same. So I beg, don't do that.
Okay, I just think if you do that, then you have to accept that there's going to be less overseas player availability, because as these other shorter tournaments that are better paid come along, like the Women's IPL, then they're going to be more attractive propositions than having to go to Australia for 2 months or something. So I think that's something that you then need to take into consideration. Anyway, the interesting thing actually, just with regard to the performance of overseas players in WBBL this year, is that if you look at the team of the tournament, it's all Australians except for Mealy Kerr. And that perhaps reflects on some of the performances. I feel like that's a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to see more overseas representation within a team of the tournament. I think that's partly what you're trying to do when you name a team of the tournament, is actually reflect on some of that overseas representation. But I guess that the people who were selecting it felt that those Australians were the ones who performed the best. So, okay, I guess that's fair enough. The player of the tournament overall, Ash Gardner. I think you've mentioned her already. Her performances for the Sixers. She's just had a
She was the second top batter, the second top bowler.
Yeah.
And just way, and that's great news for Australia as well, isn't it? Because she's at the younger end of their spectrum, and some of their players are going to be retiring. We've seen Rachel Haynes kind of walk away now. That's she's played her last games of professional cricket during this WBBL.
Yeah.
But Ash Gardner's still got 10 years left on the clock, and she's producing those kinds of performances, and that kind of consistency, is just so important for Australia's future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, England.
Interesting that because Australia have named their squad who are going to go out and play India in not too long, and Ash Gardner was widely tipped for to be the next Aussie captain. She hasn't been named captain. That's gone to Alyssa Healy. She hasn't actually even been named vice captain. T-Mac, Talia McGrath, has been named as the vice captain, and that's really interesting. And I wonder whether, because it can't be anything to do with performances, I wonder whether they're sort of thinking, she's going to be our leading all-rounder for the next 10 years, so that's enough to put on her. But it's certainly interesting to see Talia McGrath named as the vice captain, and therefore you would think she's going to be the one who succeeds Meg Lanning in the long term. That is quite a meteoric rise for somebody who a couple of years ago wasn't anywhere, wasn't in the Australian side, not sure she had a central contract at that point. And all on the back of really consistent performances.
Yeah, and good for her. Obviously a player that shows that you can come in a little bit later in life. She didn't really kind of get her her career didn't really take off until she was past her mid-20s, and everyone was thinking that she wasn't going to kind of make it to that next level. She was always a decent domestic player, but there was a general feeling that she probably missed her chance internationally, and now she's the Australian vice captain, a very good chance to go on and kind of be the next captain.
Yeah, I just hope that making Healy captain doesn't take away from her amazing personality. and that she doesn't feel
I'm
that
sure
she has
it
to be
won't.
totally constrained by things that she says because she's so funny. Anyway, now, as promised, last week we said that we would talk a bit more about England's new head coach, having interviewed him, and we did get to sit in on a group press conference on Wednesday afternoon, Jon Lewis's first press after being appointed. So we'll talk about him now and our impressions. I wrote a piece for The Guardian and kind of picked out what I thought were the particularly interesting points that he said. The first one was about the fact that he's never coached in women's cricket before, and I actually was really interested in this. I asked him about this, and he said, well, as far as I'm concerned, you coach individuals, not gender. And so it's an interesting statement, and kind of a statement about the way that he's going to go about coaching this team.
And a statement that the Guardian's headline writers pulled out and turned into a headline that certain people asked to be retracted.
They said that the headline was he defended his appointment, and I don't think that was a fair representation. He was just more reflecting on on this question of whether it's going to be different to coach in women's cricket. So that was one point that was interesting. The other point, the other sort of quote that he said, which a lot of people led with actually in their pieces writing up this presser, was, "The team is ready to fly. My job is to take the handbrake off and free the players up and get them to play to their full potential." So it's really...
First of all, he's somewhat confused about his metaphors here, because unless he's got a flying car that we don't know about, you don't take the handbrake off on an aeroplane or fly a car. But
maybe it's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Sid.
Oh, maybe it is.
Yeah.
That came up in I'm a Celebrity, didn't it?
Anyway.
Not that I've been watching this.
So Jon Lewis is he's using the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang metaphor for the team. What I was going to say was that it feels a little bit like he's been appointed as a kind of continuity candidate, and I say that because from what he said, he's not going to be making radical changes to the team. He feels like they've already got the people within the squad, within the team, who can be successful and who can beat Australia, and it's just a case of saying the right things to them and putting them in the right headspace to get them to perform. So that was an interesting indication of the fact that we're not likely to see very much upheaval, I think. And the final thing that I thought was really interesting was his priorities. So when we spoke to him, he'd been in the job for 2 days. On the first day, he had a long meeting with Heather Knight as the captain. That's exactly what you would expect him to do. That relationship is really important. On his second day in the job, he had a long conversation with Catherine Brunt. And I think that that's really interesting because what we can read into that is that he sees her, and this is a guy who's been a fast bowling coach with the England men's team. He sees Catherine Brunt as central to his vision for the immediate future of the team. She is likely to play in that T20 World Cup in South Africa. In fact, I'd say that she's now nailed on to play in it, unless there's an injury concern. So he wants to sit down with her and get her views. So I thought that that was an interesting indication, and something, because there's been sort of rumblings about her potentially retiring and things like this, and was she going to play a role in the team? And according to Jon Lewis, yes, she is. But Sid, you were also kind of sitting in on this press conference, and you had some perhaps slightly different impressions.
I did have a little bit of a different take on it. So let's go back for a moment to this idea of the what he said about coaching women. He didn't quite say that coaching women is exactly the same as coaching men, but what he did say was, you coach the individual, and therefore, you coach people differently, whoever they are, and therefore it doesn't matter whether they're a man or a woman or whether, they're this player or that player, you coach everyone differently. And there's kind of, there's an element to that, but I mean, it remains the case that really kind of amounts to going, it's exactly the same, to which my response is, good luck with that, because it's not the same. And if you're really, and to be fair, he did kind of hint later.
He went on
was like,
and he said,
maybe
I'll find out what the
maybe
differences are going to be. Yeah.
But it does feel like he's a little bit complacent about those differences, and that I think that he might get, a little bit of a surprise that it really is not. He's kidding himself if he thinks it's the same. You do need to take a different approach, and everyone in the past has acknowledged this. Mark Robinson certainly acknowledged that was the case. That you approach things differently. The other thing is, to go back to Mark Robinson slightly. One thing that really came across for me is that he just seems so similar to Mark Robinson. And it's almost as if the ECB have got seller's remorse about Mark Robinson. They're like, well, we had Mark Robinson and we got rid of him. Well, that was silly of us. Can we basically get Mark Robinson again, but like not Mark Robinson?
Yeah.
Because there's so much about him. He's kind of quite a similar background. I mean, there's the Sussex thing. There's the fact that he's quite kind of quietly spoken. He's not a big aggressive shout at people kind of coach.
And Robbo was all about coaching the individual as well. Robbo was all about those individual conversations and really developed individual players.
Yeah, and those things are definitely positives. Yeah. But it does feel a little bit as if they've kind of selected someone on the grounds that he ticks a lot of boxes about being like Mark Robinson. But let's see.
Bring back Robbo. Bring back Robbo. We love Robbo.
Well, there's a lot of time to be judged. The final thing I want to say very quickly is that he does. There's a degree of complacency about what there is to be done. That he was very much like, there are no problems with this team. I just need to let them fly. Just take the handbrake off. I'm not convinced that that's actually the case. I think that there are some issues. People close to the team know what I'm talking about, and
Oh, that's very intriguing, Sid.
There will be stuff, and it's not that there are no issues. There is stuff to be done. There are changes that need making. There is stuff that needs managing.
But he kind of has to say that in order to get the job, doesn't he?
Yeah, I guess.
He spoke about in his final interview it being Jonathan Finch and Claire Connor, and he had to kind of make a pitch, and that was his pitch. And I guess you don't say to those two, "Oh, everything's really terrible," and
You're like, "You guys have done a brilliant job, and I'm just going to continue."
Well, yeah, I think that is partly what you say. Anyway, we will have to see.
We will.
And his first assignment as coach is this forthcoming tour to the Caribbean, and we have also had a squad selected for that tour, and that's been announced this week.
We should say we understand that the squad wasn't really selected by him. We believe that he was consulted briefly before the announcement, but they basically, Jonathan Finch and the management team and Heather and Co had already selected that squad.
Which is quite right,
this is not...
No, it's not his selections, and that's quite right, really, because at the moment he doesn't really know very much about most of these players, so he's going to have to work with what he's been given. So at the moment, anyway, so return of Heather Knight from her hip injury. She obviously missed the back end of our English summer. Catherine Brunt has been included, but only in the T20 squad. So that, as I kind of said earlier, signifies that she's going to be really focusing on the T20 format.
Does that mean that she's not going to play ODIs anymore at all? She's not in the ODI squad. She's already retired from Test. Is this effectively a retirement from ODIs as well?
Yeah, I think it probably is, to be honest. I think that she's decided that she's going to focus on that one format ahead of the World Cup. She really wants to win another World Cup before she retires, and the one that's coming up is going to be played in the 20-over format. So that's what she wants to do. But obviously the big headline from all of this, because there weren't really any particular surprises, other than this, the inclusion of Lauren Winfield-Hill in the squad. Just a few short weeks after it being announced that she's lost her England contract. She's back in the camp, Sid.
Yeah, obviously Lauren Winfield-Hill is going to be delighted about this.
Yeah, and she's earned it.
She's earned the right to get back. And so, I'm sure that she is excited to be back in the England picture. But I just want to think a little bit more widely about what this means, because I think that this is actually a terrible piece of player management that's gone on here. First of all, you've got rid of a player, and then a few weeks later, after you've announced you've got rid of her, you're begging her to come back. So that's the first thing. I mean, she spent the whole summer having been frozen out of the England setup and basically feeling that the writing was on the wall for her England contract.
And if you, I remember interviewing her right after the Rachel Heyhoe-Flint final, and that's exactly what she said. She said, "I may never play for England again, and I'm prepared for that, and that's why winning trophies like this."
So you put her through that, and then you go, "Oh, actually, we need to recall you." So that's the first thing. Yeah. And then on another level, the recall it really feels like what's happened here is that they've gone, "Oh my God, wicket keeping." They've gone, we've got rid of Tammy from the T20 squad. what are we going to do if Amy Jones gets injured?
Yeah, who's our
We've got
backup?
no succession here because we've stuffed up the planning again.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to bring, someone back, and that, that has been really helpful to Lauren Winfield-Hill. And, again, she'll be delighted and she deserves this, but it's partly because they've stuffed up succession planning on the wicket keeping, which has forced them to go, well, we have to bring her back because what else are we going to do? Otherwise, we've got no backup wicket-keeper option, and our backup wicket-keeper option is to get Alice Kelsey to do it, which is clearly the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard.
Yeah. I think she'd be brilliant at it.
I'm sure she would, but it's just completely bonkers.
Yeah, it is.
That's your backup plan.
I feel like with Lauren Winfield-Hill, what happened was, so they dropped her one match into the World Cup back in February. And I feel like what happened was after that, Heather had kind of made the decision in her head, she's not going to get her England contract renewed. She's not going to be part of the England setup anymore. And then they just ignored the fact that she had a brilliant domestic season and was like basically the leading batter in the 100. They totally overlooked all that, and they were just like, oh no, well, we already made that decision back in February, so sorry, it doesn't matter what you've done. You're losing your England contract. And then they've suddenly gone, but actually we do want you to come back and play for England, even though we've just taken your contract away. And so it's that kind of the sort of strategic thinking is lacking in terms of the flexibility that you would hope that they would have, that they wouldn't just go, okay, well, we ditched you a few months ago and we've already made that call. You would hope that when the contracts are actually up for renewal in October, that there's a flexibility around that thinking, and it's based on current circumstances rather than whatever was happening 6 months beforehand. So that's kind of my sense of what may have happened behind the scenes, but we obviously don't know. Anyway, it's great for Lauren Winfield-Hill, and we hope that she plays and has a great tour. We did have a question come in from Ben on Twitter about are there any changes that we would make to the squad, and he was particularly thinking about Maya Boucher, who's perhaps a bit unfortunate. She's missed out on an England contract, she's missed out on selection for this tour. She obviously made her debut last year, so 2021 summer, and has kind of been slightly on the edge of things since.
I mean, she has played a few games since.
Yeah.
I think that, obviously, for the perspective of this tour, Tash Farrant obviously would have gone if she wasn't still recovering from a stress fracture. Obviously, Tash Farrant's mostly a bowler, so they wanted some bowling cover. Therefore, ADR comes in because she's a solid bowling option and a solid batting option. And I think that Maya Boucher, unfortunately, is suffering because she's not bowling anymore. And that, her England career was always slightly predicated on her being an all-rounder, and her batting hasn't quite come off sufficiently for her to play as a pure batter ahead of all the other options. And at the end of the day, the thing that's really done for Maya is Freya Kemp. That Freya Kemp's come in and gone, well, I'm taking that role, I'm the left-hander, I can really bosh it with the bat, which, Maya, is a good option, but she hasn't had an innings for England like the one that Freya Kemp had.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Maya isn't bowling, whereas Freya Kemp's perfectly capable of bowling, a full complement of overs. She did get knocked around a bit by, the Indians in the ODIs, but, everyone was getting knocked around by the Indians in the ODIs. That doesn't mean she's a bad bowler. It just means that the Indians were very much on top in that series and their confidence was very high, and everyone was going for a lot of runs, particularly in that game at Canterbury.
So I suppose what we're saying is that actually we probably wouldn't be making any changes to the squad. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I accept that Maya's missed out.
She's obviously in the plans. She's still in and around the plans for the team, and that's a good place to be. And I'm sure you'd hope that they've given her plenty of advice and guidance about what to work on over the winter.
And at the end of the day, she's still a professional cricketer.
Exactly.
So she still wakes up every day as a professional cricketer. She can devote her life to that. She can devote her life entirely to getting better and to training. She doesn't have to maintain a second job. So, this is an incentive for her to go out and kind of, better herself again. So let's hope she does so.
It's competition for places, isn't it? And that's a good thing, really, overall. Probably doesn't feel like it if you're Maya Boucher right now, but overall, it's a good thing. Okay, now, wow, this is turning into a mammoth episode.
This is a marathon show, but there's some stuff we want to talk about. Yeah, we're going to leave this till next week, but, It's
very current, isn't it? Because there have been a couple of quite big news stories about the 100 this week. The first one was, I think it was in the Telegraph, and it was about how the men's counties want to shrink the 100 into 3 weeks, I think it would be, so that the T20 Blast finals for the men can also take place in the summer holidays.
Yeah. Okay, calm down, Sid, calm down.
Well, you tweeted about this, didn't you?
So there's obviously like the men's counties have obviously realised that the 100 is not doing them any favours. They took their £1 million up front each, and now they've gone, oh, but we took the £1 million, but we thought we weren't going to have to do anything with it. We thought it was just like £1 million that came for free, and then it turned out that they wanted to relegate the Blast to second-class status. And so they're now engaged in a massive lobbying effort to try and persuade the ECB to make huge changes which have big implications for the women's game. You take the 100 out of the key summer holiday slots, that takes the women's game out of the key summer holiday slots. You squash the 100 into 3 weeks by playing lots of games simultaneously. That reduces the visibility of the women's games because it's going to be the men's games that get all that visibility. So that does have an impact.
And who's lobbying the ECB? The men's counties.
The men's counties are engaged in this huge lobbying exercise. And at the end of the day, you know, I had someone say to me on Twitter, yeah, but the women's game doesn't pay for itself, so therefore they shouldn't have a seat at the table. Guys, the men's county game doesn't pay for itself either. We know it doesn't because they sold their souls for £1 million each to allow the 100 to go ahead.
Other than Surrey.
They were so desperate.
Other than Surrey.
They took the money. So the men's county game has no more right to this money than the women's game. And, you know, I just feel that nobody is pushing the case for the women's game here. And nobody is pushing back and going, no, we should not be moving this
the women's regions should have
being
a seat
played
at the
in
table.
February. Because
calm down, Steve. The women's regions should be represented in all of these conversations, and it so often feels like they aren't. It really does.
And they should be represented equally to the men's game.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd still be outnumbered because there's only 8 women's regions, and there's.
Well, no, we should have twice as many votes. Honestly,
the
women's region should have 2 votes each.
Okay.
To counter the fact that the men's counties are otherwise going to totally prioritise their own interests. And it's not fair, and it's not right because the men's county game does not fund itself any more than the women's game does.
But Sid, I've heard that second story that I've heard. There's going to be £400 million of investment into English domestic cricket. That's great news, isn't it?
Oh man, this is the most bonkers story of them all. First of all, like, you know, if any men's county chairmen are watching this and are seriously thinking about taking this
or chairwomen
taking this 400 million, I just wake up. You know, the kind of people that have 400 million to invest in English domestic cricket are not the kind of people that are doing this as a nice favour. It is not a gift. They want something in return. You are selling your soul to these people for that much money. Now, what's also really significant here is where's this money actually coming from? Because the money is not coming from an investment group. Okay, the investment group is a channel for this money, but they're not the investment group's money. It's the people behind that. It's their money.
The investors.
Where's that money coming from? Is it coming from genuine capitalists? You know, that are looking to make an investment in the game, and they will expect their money back. Okay, that's the key here. If it's coming from people who are genuinely investing the money, they will expect to extract value over the longer term. It's not a gift. They are lending you some money, and they will want more than 400 million back, far more than 400 million. Okay, if that's the kind of people it's coming from, and actually, I don't believe it is. Because I don't believe that the kind of people that can make 400 million and have 400 million sitting around, they're going, we're going to invest this in something. They are not going to invest it in English domestic cricket. It's a bad way of investing £400 million. There are many better ways you could invest that money.
Okay. So where do you think the money's coming from?
Honestly, the only realistic place that this money must be coming from is petrodollars from the sovereign wealth funds of a Middle Eastern state.
We should say that this is speculation. We don't know.
Absolutely, we don't know, and we wouldn't know until like the last minute, at which point it becomes a fait accompli. But my suspicion is that the only people who have got that money that won't really care about getting it back, because they'll be looking for something in return. What they'll be looking for is that sports washing, that validation. They'll be looking for us to rename the 100 the Emirates 100, you know, and they'll be looking for us to kind of act as an advertising arm. And we've got all the issues going on at the moment with the FIFA World Cup, where we've kind of sold it out to a country, you know, which have some, frankly, values that don't accord with what we believe in this country. And in particular, in terms of, like, you know, human rights and gay rights and employment rights.
Yeah.
Okay. These are the kind of people you will be getting into bed with if you do that.
So
we do not want to get into bed with these people.
Just to say that the ECB has not commented on this, and we understand that there are no current plans to progress with this investment.
And
it is being widely reported. We should just make that clear, Sid. So
Absolutely.
your rant may be for no reason, but
good.
But thank you for it anyway.
Because nobody should be considering
I think this may be our longest ever episode. So shall we wrap up?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
I will go and calm down.
Why don't you go and punch a pillow or something? And we will see you in a week's time. Bye-bye.
Bye.